Sapersky. Take it away.
Thank you very much, everyone. Good. I'm glad you can see me, I'm glad you can hear me, and I'm glad that you're here. So let's talk about how to avoid quality decision-making disasters. That's the goal. And we'll focus on the neuroscience of this question. And it's not something that quality professionals often focus on, neuroscience, not a common topic to talk about, but really the issues in quality that you experience, your whole profession, the whole profession of quality is there because we don't intuitively make good decisions around quality decision-making, how to manage quality, how to manage projects. So we need to understand the kind of decision-making errors that recent research in cognitive neuroscience and behavioral economics has shown causes us to make bad decisions in projects that really damage the quality of various projects. So that's what we'll be talking about, the various ways that our brain goes wrong and how we can address it. So without further ado, let's talk about it. Let's talk about these decision-making errors. And you talk about them, as we talk about them, I want you to go to this link. So please take your time, go to this link, vivox.app/m number/156705059. Just type that into your browser. So please take the time to do that. I'll give you a minute to do so. And that will be how you can vote. So it will be really important for us to engage effectively for you to be able to vote on these questions. So again, go to this link and it's going to be there. So I hope all of you have gone there. Again, if you haven't gone there yet, please go. There you go, Chris. Chris asked for the link in the chat. Oh, thank you, Crystal. You already provided it. How efficient. I appreciate that. So, again, 15 more seconds. Please go ahead. Let's make sure that everyone's there. And this will be part of how we engage with each other. You want to know about what your fellow quality professionals think about this question and express your take on it. It's a way to present effectively and engage with these questions. So what I'm going to be talking about, the first question that I'll be talking about, the first kind of challenge that we face as human beings is called the planning fallacy. So again, it's called the planning fallacy. The planning fallacy refers to the fact that we tend to make plans and believe that everything will go according to plan. That's our intuition, that's how we feel. Unfortunately, that's not what actually happens. That's not how our reality works, and that's not how our brain works. So we need to understand that we actually don't have good planning skills. We don't intuitively have good planning skills. We tend to assume when we look at the future that the plan we make is going to be good. It's going to be quality, right? We like ourselves. We feel confident about ourselves. We feel confident about our plans. That's how our brain works. Unfortunately, things very often don't go according to plan. And this is something we don't realize. People, you've probably heard the phrase in quality that, failing to plan or failing to plan is planning to fail. Probably heard that phrase again, failing to plan is planning to fail. Well, guess what? This is unfortunately a very misleading phrase because it causes people to believe that when they make a plan, things will go according to plan. So they just make a plan and they don't put in nearly enough efforts to address risks, threats, problems, and contingencies. A much better phrase that I teach my clients is failing to plan for problems is planning to fail. Again, failing to plan for problems is planning to fail. So this planning fallacy, it leads us to not plan nearly enough for problems and risks. We underestimate the resources that we need to accomplish our projects to have good quality of time, money, information, social capital, and we run into a lot of issues. And you've probably seen that happen plenty of times. And this is a way of understanding why it happens, why plans go wrong, and why people don't put enough resources into contingencies. So this is something I want you to be thinking about as we're going into the first poll. So I hope you're the website, Vivox. And we will start. So I'm going to start the polling in just a second. All right. So you should be able to see the poll now. In your workplace, how problematic is the planning fallacy? That's the question that we want to ask. How problematic is the planning fallacy in your workplace? So vote based on your workplace and your experience, what you've seen going on. How problematic is it? How much of an issue is it for your job, your team, your efforts, your workplace, your organization? So please go ahead and vote. All right, so we're nearly finished and I'm entering the results. So again, I'll give 5 more seconds to people to vote. If you haven't voted yet, 5 more seconds. How large of a problem is it? So Kay asks if there's anything submitting button. No, you don't need to submit, just vote. If you voted, you're golden. All right, so I'm going to finish up right now, close. So this is the last chance, and look at the results. So the results show that it's not at all a very minor problem for relatively few folks, so under 14%. For most people, it's either a moderate problem or a large problem. Moderate problem or a large problem. For just under 50%, it's a moderate problem, and just under 40%, it's a large problem. So you have to realize that if it's not at all a minor problem, that's great for you. You have a wonderful workplace. But for most folks, it's a moderate problem or a large problem. So you want to be realizing that what's going on is just a tendency in how our brains work. This is just a failure of our human minds. And that's something you need to address, of course, in your own work, but especially in your team, in your organization, by conveying this information to them, that this is just the way that our brain goes wrong, and we need to address it effectively by planning in many more resources of time, effort, social capital, other resources, strategic planning, risks, threats, looking at those in advance and addressing them effectively. So let's go on to talk about what's going on more broadly. Unfortunately, when people are taught how to make decisions, how to make plans, how to go forward, they're taught to go with their gut. Follow their intuition, trust their heart. To quote Tony Robbins, be primal, be savage. That's their tendency. Unfortunately, that is a very bad tendency. Trusting your intuition really gets us into trouble. And of course, people who fall into the planning fallacy, who for over 85% of you see it as a moderate problem or a large problem, they go with their gut, they follow their intuition, they feel good about themselves and their plans, and it turns into a lot of trouble for quality professionals. Trusting our gut, what ourselves, our confidence feels very comfortable, but it often leads to quality disasters. Remember, our gut is evolved for the ancient savannah, not the modern world. That's something we forget all too often. That's what our instincts are for. The modern world has really been around since World War II. And even the more modern world has been around since the internet, since the 1990s. We haven't had time to evolve for it. Our instincts aren't suited for it. Our instincts are suited for a time when we lived in the savannah. That is what we are suited for. And that's why we fall into dangerous judgment errors called cognitive biases. And that's where my area of expertise, these dangerous judgment errors, how we make bad evaluations, the cognitive neuroscience of this question. It comes from our evolutionary background, the fact that we are evolved to live in small tribes of 15 people to 150 people. That in the ancient savannah, as hunters, gatherers, and foragers, that's what our instincts are for, not the modern world. And so our brains are wired as a result of this, and just the structure of our brain. I'm not going to go into it in depth, except if you have questions in the Q&A, I can go into it in more depth, the specific biological aspects of it. There's a tie-in between the evolutionary background and how our brain is wired that causes us to make bad decisions, especially in response to threats, in response to problems. And of course, as quality professionals, you deal with problems, issues all the time. Now, the fight or flight response is unfortunately our primary response to threats. That was great for hunter-gatherers, the fight or flight response. You had to jump at 100 shadows to get away from that one saber-toothed tiger. You might have heard of it as a saber-toothed tiger response. The risks they faced were immediate, intense, in the moment, these saber-toothed tigers. But that's not what we face in today's world. That's not the primary risks, of course. The risks we face are long-term, uncertain, ambiguous. They come from a notification on our smartphone about perhaps an email that our supervisor sent us with some constructive critical feedback. Now, it's very tempting, intuitively, with our gut reaction, to respond with either the fight or flight response when we get constructive critical feedback from our supervisor, especially if the supervisor is one of the top-level execs who doesn't know too much about quality itself, giving us constructive critical feedback. So it could be the people who have more of the flight response, and there's a certain personality type who have that response. The temptation is to ignore the email. Just ignore it. It feels very uncomfortable. Our gut reaction, your gut reaction, is to dismiss it, move away from it. We move away from pain, move away from discomfort. That's the flight response. And so just ignore it, never happened. Not great, but that's the way it is. And then the other type of personality is the fight response. That's the aggressive response. Move toward it, solve the problem. It's the temptation to write back saying, what are you talking about? You're wrong. I'm great. You're a jerk. I'm awesome. That is the temptation. Of course, it's a very bad idea. That is not how you get ahead in an organization. The way you get ahead is understanding that what the boss is telling you is a consequence of something that's going on in your systems and processes, something that's going wrong, an issue that's happening. So you want to look at what's going on in your own systems and processes, in your team or in your individual organization, performance, whatever, and see what are the underlying causes that led to the boss perceiving a problem, regardless if there's a problem or not. But the perception of the problem is the problem, let's be honest. So the perception of the problem, you got to see, look at the causes, look at what led to this, and then respond to the boss and say, hey, I see what led to this. Here are the issues that caused a perception of a problem or problem itself, whatever it is, and describe how you will address the situation. That is the right response. That's a very complex response. It requires tamping down your natural intuitive responses, the flight or the fight, and then figuring out the underlying complex system and consequences. What led to this situation and what are the results of it? So you've got to figure out these complex dynamics that are not at all natural, intuitive, but they are what lead you to success. So this is something that's difficult to do. You've probably learned how to do it if you've made it this far, hoping to make it further, but we still make so many problems for ourselves when we make poor decisions, especially when we feel very confident. I'm more of the fight response type, and it's, I have to say, I've fallen into this trap myself when I'm my own boss. I'm the CEO of a company called Disaster Avoidance Experts, consulting, coaching, and training in these topics. But when a client, who's essentially my boss, has some constructive critical feedback, I've not always responded in the best manner possible. And I know that I tend to be overconfident and fall into these traps myself, although I know about these topics and I definitely avoid many more of these traps than I do. But I felt confident often in the decisions that I made. And the more confident I felt, and there are some situations that I made bad decisions and I felt very confident about those decisions. So I'm curious, as we go into the next poll, so take a look at the polling, whether that happened to you. So take a look at the poll right now. Was there ever a time when you were very confident that you were right about something and you turned out to be badly wrong? And it led you to doubt other areas where you were wrong. I mean, I know it happened to me where it led me to doubt my own ability to manage my clients effectively, do effective work, then make good strategic plans. So it caused me some problems, I know that. So please vote on this and let's see what happened to you with your experience. So I see 47 people are signed on and we have 75% of the people voted. Let's go on. Okay, so most people voted. We have 36 out of 47, so 77%. Let's get a couple more votes. 5 more seconds. All right. Finishing up, and let's take a look at the results. So as you see from the results, if you're on the screen, you have about 15% of the people for whom that never happened, that they felt very confident they were right about something and turned out to be badly wrong, leading them to doubt other areas where they might be wrong. But of course, for the majority, 15% this didn't happen to, 85%, just under 85% it did happen to. So 85% of the folks, this is a situation that they experience. So you can understand what I'm talking about. This is something that's very intuitive, that's very natural for us to experience. And it happens way too often for our own goods that these bad results from our own judgment errors. So let's take a look and think about the next step about how we can overcome these dangerous judgment errors. And of course, the important thing is for you to overcome it and to help others do so. You're learning about how to overcome these problems yourself. Clearly, 85% of you had these sorts of experiences that led to problematic outcomes, and you're learning information that you will need to bring to your workplace as a trusted advisor and help whether your bosses, whether your teammates, whether your subordinates make better decisions. You need to go against your intuitions. This seems counterintuitive, and that's by definition. Our intuitions are going to lie to us often. With the planning fallacy, with confidence and so on, they're going to lead us in the wrong direction very often. So you need to learn how to go against your intuitions. Our intuitions, they're great for early humans, for that natural, primitive, savage state. What Tony Robbins says, be primal. Well, he gives horrible advice because we don't live in that primal, primitive, savage society. We live in a civilized society. So our brains are not wired for making decisions in today's civilized, complex, multipolar, multicultural, globalized world. We live in a very complex society. It's not small tribes. We have to work in the professional workplace, and that is completely different from the kind of work that we did in the savanna environment of hunting, foraging, and gathering. Not the same thing. Now, you already do this, you might not realize it, in some areas of your life. Think about eating. It's a very primal, very basic activity. And in the savanna environment, think about coming across a box of donuts, right? If you have a box of donuts in the break room, and you have a dozen donuts, right? That's how companies serve them, by the dozen. Well, that's how their groceries, that's how Dunkin' Donuts and others sell donuts. You know what? You should probably not be having a dozen donuts. I'm not even going to say that probably. You should not be having a dozen donuts at a time. But what happens when you have that open box of donuts in the break room and you start having a donut? Well, you know what? It's very hard to stop at just one. Very difficult to stop at just one. Just like, or maybe donuts isn't your thing. Maybe ice cream. So imagine you have half a carton. You have a carton of ice cream, half gallon of ice cream, and then you start having ice cream. Well, did you know that, if a serving of donuts is one donut, a serving of ice cream is half a cup? I mean, show me this person who can have half a cup of ice cream. I don't know this person. I can't. I know that one. So this is something that we have to realize is all stemming from the savanna environment. In the savanna environment, when we came across a source of sugar, like honey, apples, bananas, it was very important for us to eat as much of it as possible in order to survive and thrive. We're the descendants of those who had a very strong fight or flight reflex and who had a very strong triggering by sugar. When they had sugar, they were triggered, and our ancestors were triggered, we're the descendants of them, and then they ate a whole lot of sugar. And they were then able to survive, thrive, and reproduce. And their competitors were. So we're the descendants of those people who have that strong triggering. Now, in the modern world, it's a terrible idea to permit ourselves to be strongly triggered by sugar. This, in a world where we have an overabundance of sugar, where companies sell sugar right and left, that's a very problematic habit. There's a reason the United States suffers through the obesity epidemic. Now, hopefully, you've learned some techniques to address the natural triggering, natural, primitive, intuitive, not savage, that savage triggering by sugar, such as, for example, eating fruit. So if you have donuts in the office, maybe you learn to bypass them and go for the sliced fruit or the bowl of peaches or apples. That's a much healthier alternative. And that is one out of many techniques to address our triggering, and that's just something we need to do for our own health. So you probably learned some techniques to have better health, because this is all learned habits. These are learned mental habits. I have to tell you, from childhood, from birth, no one likes salad. Salad is an acquired taste. Sugar is not an acquired taste. Sugar everyone likes from childhood. Salad is an acquired taste. So you have to acquire the taste. You have to acquire the right mental habits. Just like you have to acquire the right mental habits, the right habits. So you've acquired the right eating habits. You also have to acquire the right decision-making habits. Unfortunately, we're taught very horrible lessons about decision-making, going with our gut, trusting our intuition. What if we were taught to go with our gut on food? Well, we'd be eating donuts and ice cream all day long. I mean, it doesn't sound so horrible until the next day, which it's not so great. So you have to use the same principles for that as well. Now, let's talk a little bit about more of these dangerous judgment errors, these cognitive biases. I want to bring up one that proved very important in COVID-19. So this is a very important cognitive bias for major disruptors. We tend to assume that everything will keep going normally because in the savanna environment, our future was determined much by the past. So our future, we can be pretty confident, was going to be just like the past. So the only changes would be changes of the season, winter, spring, summer, fall. That's the main changes. The future wouldn't be different. Now think about ourselves. Think about yourself. Imagine yourself 5 years from now. What do you imagine yourself to be? Just think about that. 5 years from now. Probably a slightly wiser, older version of yourself. That's kind of how we think about ourselves. Maybe a little bit more money, a little bit more wisdom, a little bit more seniority. That's how we tend to think about ourselves. But when we think about ourselves 5 years ago, we tend to see a very different person. A very different person. I know I changed a lot in the last 5 years, and you probably did as well. But we don't think that the person that we are right now will be just as different 5 years from now, with our values, habits, preferences, as we were 5 years ago. Because of this normalcy bias, we tend to assume that the future will be like the past. We think that the future will go normally. So we greatly underestimate. We forecast the short-term future based on the past, and we underestimate the likelihood and the impact of major disruption. Now think about the impact of our major world is very much impacted by, modern world is very much impacted by major disruptions. Think about technology, let's say the rise of a smartphone. How impactful was that? How powerful was that? That's a very powerful disruptor. What about the 2008-2009 fiscal crisis? Totally human-caused, major global crisis that powerfully disrupted our lives. Or the COVID-19 pandemic, of course, which is a part human, part natural caused disaster that also very much disrupted our lives. But we don't think about this. We don't think about COVID-19 as a nearly bigger disruptor as it is. There are so many people rushing to reopen, rushing to go back to normal, and not really thinking about what is the quality going to be of our lives and our projects and our organizations, our businesses in this current environment. It's going to be not normal. This is not how you want to open up, that we are in a new abnormal. This is much more appropriate for our current environment. There are so many people who are rushing to open back up, and what they're running into headlong is restrictions, shutting down. I wrote a book about this called Resilience, Adapt and Plan for the New Abnormal of the COVID-19 coronavirus pandemic, because I published a number of articles that I taught op-eds in early March 2020 of this year, which forecast and foresaw that COVID-19 would be much worse than we thought, and that what we'll have is waves of restrictions and loosenings. So waves of restrictions, we saw that in March and April, and there was a decrease in cases. And then loosenings, we saw that in May and June, which, as I forecast, would happen way too early in a number of states that would be loosening restrictions, and there would be a great explosion, very quick increase in cases. And as I mentioned, as I talked about in my op-eds, there would be increased restrictions, so shutting back down again. And businesses would lose a lot of money that rush to reopen, that are still pushing to reopen. So there's a lot of money being lost by businesses that should not have rushed to reopen and that are making bad decisions about their strategic planning. I was contacted by one oil and gas company to facilitate their strategic retreat. And as part of investigating their plans, I found out that they were treating COVID-19 just as a day-to-day issue, not a strategic issue. Well, that's terrible decision-making, unfortunately, but that's how they were proceeding. And they weren't realizing how bad their plans would be, how bad their project plans would be as a result. So what we need to realize is that we live not in a normal situation. We're never going to go back to January 2020. The most optimistic case for getting a vaccine and then is by the spring of 2021. That's the most optimistic case. And then how long would it take the government to produce enough of it, distribute enough of it, and actually vaccinate people for most of the American population? Let's even say the people who are over 50 and people who are more vulnerable to COVID-19 and people who are under 50 who have various illnesses like diabetes or something, or health conditions like smoking that cause them to be more vulnerable. Well, the government combined with the companies have to produce enough of this vaccine, then have to distribute it, and then have to vaccinate people in a context where only 50% of the population has indicated that they will be ready and willing to take vaccine. So there's a massive educational campaign that's needed to convince people to take the vaccine. So what are we dealing with? I mean, the government has shown a very poor level of, this needs to be the federal government, of course, this can't be states. The government has shown a very poor level of competence so far in doing various testing, contact tracing, producing personal PPE, personal protective equipment, ventilators, and so on. Federal government has done an atrocious job, let's just be honest. So how good of a job is it going to do with the vaccination? I don't think it's going to do a great job. So we can assume that even at a moderate level of government competence, let's say significantly higher than it has shown already, that will take process of production, distribution, and vaccination will take about a year. So we can deal with COVID-19 by the spring of 2022. Spring of 2022. And that's the most optimistic scenario. That assumes the Moderna vaccine or the Pfizer vaccine, one of those couple of vaccines, several vaccines that are in phase 3 trials right now, turns out to be good, highly effective, over 90% effective. That is not guaranteed at all. That could be it could be only 50% effective, or it could be not effective at all. That would be a very problematic situation. And what would we keep dealing with? That would push a timeline for an effective vaccine widely available into 23 or 24 or even 25. That's what we're dealing with. So this is a long-term major disruptor. And people's habits, norms, and values will be changed forever by these waves of restrictions and loosenings. So that's why the publisher approached me to write a book about this very quickly, which is out right now, Resilience, Adapt, and Plan for the New Abnormal of the COVID-19 coronavirus pandemic. But this is not something that people are anticipating, and they're making bad decisions as a result. And this is something that you need to educate people on. So I'm going to go to the next poll. And I want you to vote, please. Oh, sorry about this. Skip that poll. Okay, so in your workplace, how problematic is the normalcy bias? Please vote on this poll. So again, how problematic is the normalcy bias in your workplace? With COVID-19, with other factors where not anticipating major disruptors, serious disruptors, and thinking that the future will be much like the past, not anticipating major disruptors.
This is a repeat. Or was the last one asking of our personal experience instead of the workplace?
I'm sorry, I don't think the normalcy bias is a repeat. So yeah, the normalcy bias was not something that we asked about before. The previous one asked about the planning fallacy.
Sorry, the answers fooled me.
No worries. The answers are standardized to make it easier for folks. Okay, so almost 89% of the people voted, so I'm going to give 5 more seconds. If a couple more people want to vote. All right. So as we'll see, that's not at all a very minor problem for even less people than the planning fallacy. We have under 13% of the people for whom it's not at all a problem or a very minor problem. For the rest of you, 87% and plus, it's either a moderate problem or a large problem. About 2/3 say that it's a moderate problem in their workplace. So moderate problem, not anticipating major serious disruptions like COVID-19, not anticipating then when they do occur, underestimating their impact. So 2/3 of you. And about 23%, so just under a quarter, have that as a large problem, as a serious problem in the workplace. So both those for whom it's a moderate problem and a large problem, think about how to bring this information to your workplace and teach them about how to address these sorts of challenges. So we'll talk about how to address these sorts of challenges through how do you make better decisions? How do you make effective decisions? How do you make strategic decisions that are going to be actually address a lot of these cognitive biases? I'm going to talk about 2 techniques. First, 5 questions to avoid decision disasters. This can be used in both daily settings and large decision making, but especially useful in daily settings. There's a more thorough approach that you can use in large decision making, but you can also use this for large decision making if you don't have time for a more thorough approach. So 5 questions that you can use by yourself or together with a team to avoid decision disasters. First, what important information didn't I yet fully consider? What evidence didn't you take into account? It's very tempting, very easy for us to not take into account evidence that goes against our intuitions, our self-image, our perception of ourselves. So with planning fallacy, for example, we tend not to take into account risks, threats, and problems because our gut reaction doesn't intuitively believe that they will happen to us. We have a positive view of ourselves and our reality and our future, so we underestimate all the risks and problems that might occur. Similarly with normalcy bias, We tend to view the future as being mostly like the past, so we don't anticipate major disruptions that might occur in this future because it's not within our realm of the imagined. That's not what we think about. We don't think about these issues. We don't think about what Donald Rumsfeld called the unknown unknowns, or Taleb called the black swans. Nassim Taleb called the black swans. This is not something that we tend to think about. And there are all sorts of these issues. So you want to look for information that goes against your intuitions, that goes against your beliefs. Try to prove that your initial decision, that your initial assumption is wrong. Try to falsify it. If you can't falsify it, great, it's more likely to be right. But if you can falsify it, that's even better, because then you won't screw yourself up making a bad decision. The same goes for teams. So this is a question that, as part of a team decision-making process, what I have my clients do is make sure that they ask these 5 questions as part of a team decision-making process. So everyone answers the questions, everyone thinks about the questions, which I'll go through in a bit, as before they enter a room and with a decision-making process, and then they discuss their answers in the room, going through each question step by step, and then they come up with a cohesive answer. It saves so much time because they have a structured process and they thought about the questions in advance. They can be confident about the quality of their answers. That's the first one. Second, what dangerous judgment errors didn't I yet address? So what evidence did you take into account? My book, Never Go With Your Gut, How Pioneering Leaders Make the Best Decisions and Avoid Business Disasters, talks about the 30 most dangerous cognitive biases in business settings, in professional settings, and how do you avoid them. So normalcy bias and planning fallacy are just 2 out of those 30 most dangerous ones. And by the way, overall, there are over 100 cognitive biases. Not all of them are relevant to the workplace, so I talk about the 30 most dangerous ones in my book. But that's something that if you want to check out all of them, go to the list of cognitive biases on Wikipedia, and there's a long list of them. Again, far from all of them relevant to the workplace, some relevant to personal relationships, some relevant to civic life, and so on. So you want to learn about the 30 most dangerous ones for professional settings, because those are going to be what undermine quality. Then, what would a trusted and objective advisor suggest I do? So think about that angel on your shoulder. What would that angel tell you to do? Step outside of yourself. Think about what you would tell a trusted friend you care about, who is in the same situation as you, to do. You get about 50% of the benefit of this question, according to extensive research on it, by stepping outside of yourself and getting that external perspective. That's the essence of a technique here. You're getting an external perspective. And you get the other 50% of the benefit by calling this person or texting the person if you're a millennial. So make sure that you have that trusted and objective advisor who you can reach out to within your company or outside of it. And ASQ provides a nice venue to have peers, some of whom are from outside your company, of course, to ask these questions. How have I addressed all the ways this could fail? So think about the decision. Whatever decision you're looking at, think about all the ways it can go wrong. There are so many ways that any decision can go wrong. And think about the most important ones, combining probability of it going wrong in that way and impact. How bad would it be if it went wrong in that way? And address the failures. And then, of course, improve your decision by addressing the failures. Finally, what new information would cause me to revisit this decision? This is a surprisingly important question, because once we make a decision, we tend to be emotionally committed to it. And so much of what I talk about is about emotions, our intuitions, our instincts, same things. Our emotions, primal, savage, those are instincts, those are intuitions. We refer to the same thing, what we're comfortable with. When we make a decision, we feel emotionally attached to it. Our instincts feel like it's the right decision, regardless of whether it's the right decision after we make it, because we become attached to it. If you look at the basis for our decision making, you'll find that about 80 to 90% of our decision making is emotional in nature, when we just go ahead and do what our intuition suggests, when we just go ahead and decide how we usually go around and decide things. That is highly problematic. And specifically, after we make a decision, we become very attached to it. That is a big problem. That is not something you want to see happen, especially bad for teams, because it's hard for teams to go back and revisit the decision, because you're all committed, you go out of the room and you proclaim it to everyone, and then it turns out wrong. Well, who's going to acknowledge that it's wrong and go back to everyone and say, we need to rethink this? What really works well is to address this problem in advance. So you want new information that will cause you to revisit the decision. You want to decide what would cause you to revisit this decision, whether it's launching a new project or making a hire or anything like this. What would cause you to revisit the decision that you made? If you bake it into your decision, this revision point, whether your individual decision-making or especially for a team decision-making for a project, that would really help you along, because then you see a revision point. We're finding new information that's causing us to see that we were incorrect in some ways. We need to change our minds. We need to revisit the situation. And that is very important and helpful in addressing problems. So I want you to take a look at the poll. The next poll. Take a look at the poll, and I want you to vote on how helpful might it be for your team to use the 5 questions to avoid decision disasters for daily decisions. So for your team, for yourself if you are not part of a team, but for your team if you are part of the team. Great. We have about 50% of the people who voted. Let's get those numbers up. Okay, I see about 80% of the people voted. I'll give people 10 more seconds to vote. All right, let's finish up. So take a look at the results. You'll see that everyone would find it helpful. Great. So it would be helpful for your team or yourself or both to use these 5 questions for daily decisions. There's no one who would find it not helpful. About just under a third would find it moderately helpful for themselves and their team to use these 5 questions to inform their daily decisions. Those kind of, you should have about 2 to 10 decisions a day that you should be using it. So, maybe sending an important email would be one type of decision. How do you prevent all the ways that it fails? What haven't you considered? What would be a revision point? And for various projects, of course, making a purchase that's something like over $1,000 or something like that. And over 2/3 would find it very helpful. So that's great. I'm glad to hear that over 2/3 would find it very helpful to use this decision-making technique. Given that you would find it very helpful, you want to really think about how you would introduce this and bring it back to your team. And there's going to be resources at the end of the presentation that you can sign up for that will help you bring it to the team. All right. So I want to talk about a bigger technique. So this is for decision making. Now, I also want to talk about decision implementation. This is decision implementation. How do you've made a quality decision, good quality decision. How do you ensure quality in implementing it, right? That's a big question. That's a big struggle. So there's an 8-step process that I want to go through that will help you ensure quality in your decision making. So first, you want to gather the relevant stakeholders. Those 6 to 10 people, you want to gather a combination of leaders with the most expertise, not just higher up personnel, but those with the relevant expertise, and make sure they have people in the room who can have the power to make the decisions. Consider using an independent facilitator. This is really important. You can use somebody from the ASQLA group for folks from the ASQLA, maybe some board members who can do this. Others, you have a coach, you have a consultant, maybe someone from the advisory board of your organization or board of directors, someone who's an independent facilitator, or a peer in another department who really does not have any stake in the outcome, but who you trust and is objective. Then explain the process. So that's the next step. Explain the failure proofing technique, which you'll learn about. Describe all the steps. Make sure everyone's on the same page. I've seen it surprisingly often where a process step for making decisions, implementing projects is not clear to everyone at the beginning, and you get really people upset and screwed up because they don't know what they're going through. So you want people to know about this. Then, for the project, whatever you're implementing, so this is implementation of a decision, maybe a process, maybe a project, whatever you're doing, consider the next best alternatives. So you have already an initial alternative, so you have some kind of plan for a project or a process. Then you want, what are alternatives? Writing down next best alternatives. So have each participant write down one next best alternative anonymously. Anonymity is really important. This is crucial because let's be honest, a lot of politics in organizations and in teams. So you want to make sure to address the politics in advance by ensuring anonymity for people. And it's easy to do when you have, let's say you're having a virtual session. You can do this using Google Forms or in person, of course. If you have an independent facilitator, you have everyone write it down, and the independent facilitator just reads out these NDAs, this next best alternatives. Facilitator gathers and reads everyone's NDAs, and then everyone holds a vote to select the top two and facilitate the discussion. And then you want to take one of the anonymous votes to see if the NBA is preferable to the original version, the original plan. And if it's not, if the original plan is still preferable, consider whether you want to incorporate elements from the next best alternative into the plan. Then, next step. This is really crucial. So you're getting into the real meat of the issue. So NBA is the first step. Then you want to imagine that the project, decision, process absolutely failed, definitely failed. You don't want to say simply, well, what if it fails? What are the problems? That's not what you want to do. You want to start by saying it definitely failed, absolutely failed, catastrophically failed, whatever. Because that gives you permission. That gives you opportunity. That gives you permission to actually address all the reasons for failure. This is where you brainstorm all the reasons for why it failed. Again, you want that permission. You want to give everyone in the room permission, especially the supporters of the project. Get them together. Don't have this kind of, because otherwise, if you don't give them the permission, too often they'll be denying the possibility of failure and not being collaborative members of the team in this failure-proofing technique. You want them to imagine and agree that it completely failed and then why it failed. So each participant here anonymously again writes down 3 reasons for failure. And this is especially important to do anonymously because there's politics, and if someone writes down a reason for failure that it failed because it failed because the operations team had a lot of conflicts with the marketing team, and the operations team didn't convey the right dimensions of the new product to the marketing team, and the marketing team didn't have the right marketing, and that's why this new product failed. That's not necessarily something you want to voice publicly, especially if the VP of operations and the VP of marketing are in the room. But that's something you put down anonymously. So facilitator gathers everyone's statements, and again, this can be done online or in person, highlights the key themes. You don't simply read everyone's statements, you want to highlight the key themes, focus on the reasons that would not typically be brought up while ensuring anonymity, like this politically weighted reason that I brought up as an example. Then you want to decide the next step. You want to decide on the problems that are most likely to occur. Look at the problems, decide on the most likely ones and the most impactful ones, especially ones that are rude, politically problematic, dangerous somewhat in the organization to careers. Check for potential cognitive biases. So we talked about cognitive biases, and again, assess anonymously then the probability of each reason for failure. So what is the most likely reason for failure, the probability of them? Use percentages and pay a special attention to ones that are most harmful, most impactful, in other words. And then you have the payoff. You're talking about problems, you're talking about all the reasons for them, what are the most likely ones, then brainstorm ways of fixing them. Decide on several failures that seem most relevant, and what are the ways of solving them. Here you brainstorm publicly addressing potential mental blind spots. And there's an assessment on dangerous judgment errors in the workplace. It talks about the 30 most dangerous judgment errors. It's in my book, Never Go With Your Gut, How Pioneering Leaders Make the Best Decisions and Avoid Business Disasters. Next, you do the same thing for success. You talked about problems. Problems are something you definitely want to address. But of course, part of quality is ensuring maximizing success. So you want to go through the exact same process for success. Imagine that the decision, project, or process succeeded spectacularly. So it succeeded wonderfully. It was great. The supporters of the project will love this step. Then, why did it succeed? Think about ways that it succeeded. What are the ways of achieving this outcome? That is the next step. So you want to brainstorm what are the ways of achieving the success. Again, each participant writes out 3 plausible reasons for the success. The facilitator again gathers everyone's statements, highlights key themes, leads discussion, checks for cognitive biases, and brainstorms ways of maximizing the reasons for success. So integrating them into the plan. And then, of course, the last step, revising the plan. So you have already the problems, you have already this for opportunities, so the reasons for failure, reasons for success. You want to revise the overall plan now that you have the reasons for failure, the reasons for success, revise it. And if needed, you can repeat the exercise. So you don't need, if it seems like there's still a number of issues outstanding when you did the initial exercise, you feel you haven't gone through it fully, or you want to take the time to reassess the plan and revise it. Maybe it's become clear there's a number of issues with the plan and you really need to go back to the beginning, then the exercise can be repeated once you create a new plan. So that is how you address implementation. Implementation of decisions, implementation of projects, implementation of processes. As you can guess, we're going to go to the poll right now. So, next poll. How helpful might it be for your team to use the failure proofing technique to ensure project success? Please vote. How helpful might it be to use this technique to ensure project success? Okay, we have 68% of the people voted. So let's see if we can get those numbers up a little bit. And I'll give you 10 more seconds to vote. 10 more seconds. All right, let's finish up. So take a look at the results. So just under 5% of the people would find it not helpful, but the large majority, over 95% of you, would find it moderately helpful or very helpful. So moderately helpful, just under 40% of you would find it moderately helpful, and over just under 60% would find it very helpful. So that's great. So it sounds like the large majority of you would find the techniques, both techniques, the 5 techniques for 5 questions to avoid daily decision disasters, and this failure proofing technique, either moderately helpful, or most of you would find it, a majority for each would find it very helpful. So I strongly encourage you to think about how you will integrate these techniques into the workplace once you come, you're already at home, but once you finish this presentation and once you're able to incorporate this information into your work. So for additional resources, you can go to tinyurl.com/de-event and include the presentation date. You'll get the free copy of the assessment on dangerous judgment errors in the workplace and a free book copy of Never Go With Your Gut, How Pioneering Leaders Make the Best Decisions and Avoid Business Disasters. The book copy will have full information about the 5 questions to avoid decision disasters and how to apply the failure proofing technique. So you'll have a free digital copy of this book that the presentation is based on, and the free copy of the assessment on dangerous judgment errors in the workplace. So I encourage you to go to tinyurl.com/the/d-event right now and input your information. So I'll give you a few seconds, and I will also chat it into the chat. So you should be able to see the link in the chat. So I'll give you a minute to go on that chat, so on that link, and put in your information. And then after that, we'll go to the question and answers. Ten more seconds. Well, of course, you can put it in while we do the question and answers if you haven't had a chance to do so, so don't worry about it. But we'll go to the question and answers in about 10 seconds. All right, everyone. So you can still fill in the form, of course, and again, the link is both at the bottom of the screen and in the chat. And if you want this, the free book, free copy of digital copy of the book and the assessment. But in the meantime, we will also go to questions and answers. So please go ahead, ask your questions, got your answers. You can type them into the chat. So welcome you to respond in the chat if you have that. And that's probably going to be, in order to reduce confusion, the best way to do the answers and questions. If you're dialing in from a phone and you can't do the chat, please unmute yourself and then ask the question. But ideally, you would put it in the chat and I'll happily respond. Great. So the question was about what I'm doing. So this is not PowerPoint. This is a different software called Prezi Video. So Kai asked, how do I make the PowerPoint appear around the photo video? This is a new software where I'm one of the beta testers that allows you to have you appear in the same time as the slides. So take a look at this product. It's in the, I put it into the chat link, prezi.com/video-product. So check that out if you're interested. Great. You're welcome, Kai. Welcome further questions, chat them into the chat, or again, if you are on the phone, you can unmute yourself and then you could ask the question. Chris asks, do I have the book in audio form? Yes, but unfortunately the publisher does not allow me to provide a book free in audio form, only in digital form, in PDF form. So if you do want it in audio form, just go to audible.com, and it'll be available there for sale. And thank you for asking that, Chris. John asks, management wants quick answers. And how do you use a strategic approach? The great thing about the 5 questions to avoid decision disasters is it's very quick. It means 5 questions. It takes 2 minutes, 3 minutes to go through it. I can guarantee to you that if the management goes through it, takes 2 to 3 minutes, that's great if everything is right. If everything works well, if it's not a problem, it takes 2 to 3 minutes. And if you get stuck on any of these, like let's say how to address all the ways that things can go wrong, or what information we haven't considered, they'll be very grateful that you brought this up, because obviously it prevents them from making a screwy decision. So management will be grateful if it takes longer than 2 to 3 minutes. But if the decision is the right one, it shouldn't take more than 2 to 3 minutes to go through it. Okay, so that's John's question. Marion asks, so Marion sent it to me privately, but this is her question, so everyone can see. How do you give your corporate clients confidence to think the 5 ways can be adopted in a large organization which thrives on inertia and politics? Well, the thing is, the nice thing about the 5 questions is that it doesn't have to be adopted by an organization as a whole. That's the wonderful thing about it. You can adopt it as a small team, as an individual even, or as individuals throughout the organization. You can use it to inform your decision making. And once it becomes clear, this is not a whole large change. The nice thing about these techniques, none of them, neither the failing proofing nor the 5 questions, are big, large-scale change management projects. Those are hard to institute. These are very easy because you can start using them by yourself without anyone involved. So you can start using them by yourself, you can get your team to use them, and it will become obvious that your team is making better decisions, that your team is doing better, and that you are doing better, and that your team is doing better than others around you. So people will want to copy your success. I've had a lot of quality professionals and project management professionals and security professionals start using them, and they provide a model for others because everyone wants to figure out, well, why are you being so successful? How come you're doing better? So it just spreads throughout an organization. So this is the beautiful thing about this. So Joseph asked, if business decisions are oriented towards risk-taking and others-based decisions on minimizing risks, how do we encourage risk takers to avoid dangerous judgment errors? Risk-taking is rewarded. So what you want to do in those cases is highlight how, let's say, the failure-proofing technique talks about how you can maximize success. It doesn't simply talk about addressing failure, which it talks about. Of course, it's very important, but you also want to maximize success. And risk takers often don't think about how they could improve their project to maximize success. And that's something that you as quality professionals really need to sell, really need to promote. You really need to highlight this. The field of quality is too often perceived as naysayers, as Mr. No or Mrs. No. That is not a good brand image. You don't want to see yourself or to be seen only as Mr. No or Mrs. No. You want to say, yes, we need to address failures, but you haven't thought about all the ways that you can maximize success. So let's talk about all the ways that you can maximize success. That will really help with people who want to take risks, and it will show them that taking risks is foolish if you haven't yet maximized success. So you want to make wise risks, and part of that is figuring out how to maximize success strategically, as well as how to address failure. That's what I found really helpful for those take charge, can do executive risk takers. So thank you for the question. Other questions? And wait for 10 more seconds to see if there are any final questions. So again, if you want to, you can unmute yourself or you can chat in the chat box. Catherine asks, how do you address innovation with your process? It's actually quite simple. This is really important for this process is really important, both the decision making and the failure proofing for innovation. Because whenever you make a decision about whether do you institute innovation or don't institute innovation, you want to go for what you haven't considered, because something that you might not have considered about the innovation can be both harmful, dangerous. Some innovations are dangerous, let's be honest, and some of it can be even better made when you consider additional information. And of course, you want to consider whether innovation might fail or not, and what a trusted objective advisor would suggest you do. Same thing, so that's the decision making on the innovation. And then for implementing the innovation, you want to address the best alternatives. So what about if there's a next best alternative that's even better than your original planned innovation? That's great if you can come up with that. And you want to address all the problems, all the potential failure modes of the innovation. And of course, you want to maximize success. So you want to address all the opportunities of the innovation. Sometimes the innovation will have many more opportunities than you originally considered, and it'll be much better than you thought it would be. So that's, when you come up with something, you thought it's something weird, sticky paper that doesn't have many uses, and you come up with a Post-it note, right? That people don't really think about. That's how the 3M invented it. It wasn't really seen as a major innovation and opportunity until they really thought about all the applications. And most people don't think about all the applications of an innovation. So this is a great tool to use for innovations. Thank you for asking that, Catherine. Another 10 seconds in case somebody has another question inspired by that thought. All right, looks like the questions are over. So I want to thank you very much for your attention, and I really appreciate you attending this presentation. Hope it has been helpful. Given that everyone would find the 5 questions helpful, most of you, over 2/3, would find it very helpful, and that the majority of you would find it this failure proofing technique very helpful. That's great. So please institute them in your workplace. And those who want more information about it, the free book and free copy of the assessment, please fill out the form tinyurl.com/de-event. And I will, of course, send you much more information about this. So again, that's all in the notes, in the chat. And thank you very much. I really appreciate you coming. Bye-bye all.
Thank you, Gleb. I'm going to turn the meeting back to Rhonda now. That was a very interesting presentation. Thank you.
You're very welcome. Very glad that it was helpful. Goodbye all.
Bye.